Let's go! We're doing a stock up and stock down of every SEC men's basketball program moving forward because it's March Madness and everybody's mad because there wasn't a single SEC team to make the Elite Eight. Well, let's actually take that back. There wasn't a single men's team that made it to an Elite Eight, and let's be honest, men's basketball in the SEC is lagging behind women. So we're going to talk about that obviously a little bit later. But for right now, let's go through each and every program. And starting off here, obviously, with the program in the SEC, that is Kentucky, right? This man is the most criticized coach in the entire conference. Nobody comes close to John Calipari. And look, only one national championship. But the truth is, well, Cal's NCAA basketball success is actually pretty good. You can make a case outside of maybe Jay Wright and a few others. She has been one of the better NCAA tournament coaches of the past decade. But the truth is, only one national title. At Kentucky, you want more than that. And you take a look at this year's team, obviously losing to Kansas State in the NCAA tournament in retrospect doesn't look too bad, considering how good Kansas State played after that one, beating Michigan State and barely losing to FAU. But still, your guards no-show, Toppin in that game. But look, it's the NCAA tournament. Let's take a look at the overall season. And, well, it wasn't really that great for Kentucky either because there were so many ugly home losses this year. Blowout by Arkansas, and then, of course, that nasty loss to South Carolina at Rupp Arena. So, for me, I would give Kentucky a C at absolute best this year, especially with their lofty standards. And look, there should be some questions whether this program is actually better with Oscar Tshiebwe. Now, that's actually a deeper discussion for a different day, but I don't know. He is a relic of the old age. Your offense flowing through a traditional post player is kind of prehistoric, if you ask me. So you can have your own opinions about that, but Kentucky, without reasonable doubt, is a stock down. But I think Cal should retain his job. Moving on to Texas A&M, obviously this young man right here, Buzz Williams, was the talk of the NCAA tournament last year because they were left out. This year you are put in as a 7 seed just to get blown out by Penn freaking State, and that was one of the worst first-round blowouts of this year's NCAA tournament, and you were a 7 and they were a 10 seed. Now, you made a run in the SEC tournament, ended up getting blown out by Alabama. That's not really anything bad, but overall, obviously, this year for Texas A&M was a step forward. No doubt the Aggies are a stock-up program because, look, there was so much pressure to follow up, last year as a team that was wronged, and you had that chip on your shoulder, and they absolutely proved it this year. And look, I give Texas A&M a lot of credit under Buzz Williams taking this program a step forward because, look, Texas A&M, not much history with men's basketball, okay? Obviously Chris Middleton and a few others, but still, I would definitely say stock up for Texas A&M. So now we get to LSU. And look, I am an LSU fan, and I would be the first to tell you that this season was a disaster, right? Yeah, you started the season with a really good record and a home win versus a somewhat good Arkansas team, but the truth is this was a disastrous season. Now, you don't think of LSU basketball as a basketball program compared to football, compared to baseball, and, of course, compared to Kim Mulkey's Lady Tigers, but LSU's basketball does have a lot of history, right? If you were to make a college all-time starting 5, well, LSU might be favored over every other team in the SEC. So, look, this is a program that doesn't have the same prestige as other SEC programs, but you have to be better than what they put out there. KJ Williams, one of the few good players on this team this year. And, look, having watched probably more LSU basketball than any of these other teams, they just lack some basic functionality, right? In terms of just simple basketball things. And that's what's concerning. It's okay if you lose. Just how do you lose? And LSU basketball had some, quite frankly, horrible losses this year where they just really weren't all that competitive at the end of games. So, obviously this is a major stock down, but Once again, still just year one in the Matt McMahon era. So obviously Ole Miss, not going to spend too much time. It's a disaster. They bring in Chris Beard. I know a lot of you feel some type of way about him actually getting this job. We'll see how it actually works out. But let me just bring up that Rodney Terry of Texas. I think he's actually done a better job coaching this team than if Chris Beard was coaching this team, because Texas is the only 2 seed to 1 or 2 seed to advance as far as they have in the NCAA tournament. But the truth is, Chris Beard at Ole Miss, he is a very talented coach, and Ole Miss can only go up. Obviously, their women's program was the biggest riser out of any men or women's basketball program in the SEC this year with the success that they had, but still, we'll see what Chris Beard can do moving forward. All right, we get to Lamont Paris for South Carolina. Obviously, not a great season in terms of wins and losses. Of course, they almost had that home victory over Alabama earlier in the season. But obviously this is not a stock up, but it's definitely not a stock down. They weren't nearly as bad as LSU was in the first year under Coach Parrish. So, as of right now, this is, about where you would expect South Carolina to be in year one. And once again, South Carolina, of course, is a women's basketball school, okay? Moving on to Georgia, first-year head coach Mike White. This is a stock down. You go from Florida to Georgia, a very lateral move, especially in terms of just the lens of men's basketball. It's actually a step down, but, Georgia Athletics, it is a very prestigious university, but you could say that about any SEC university, but we're not going to spend too much time on this one. This was a stock down with the man that is under a lot of pressure to revive this program. Now, we get to me, the most complicated evaluation here, and that is the Arkansas Razorbacks, okay? I'm going to be honest, this season was going to be a massive, massive, massive disappointment if they did not beat Kansas, right? That one victory kind of salvaged this season, right? With Eric Musselman bringing in by far his best recruiting class with the 3 5-stars in his roster. Obviously, Nick Smith was very hurt throughout the course of this year, but man, this really was a disappointing year. You would not have thought that they were under 500 in the SEC as a 10 seed in the SEC tournament. This was a disappointing year if you were to ask me. Now, once again, the Kansas win makes Eric Musselman a coach who has been to the Sweet 16 every single season. And you shouldn't think any less of Arkansas getting blown out by UConn, because UConn has blown everybody out in the NCAA tournament. So I don't think it is obviously a disaster where Arkansas just completely melted down this year. That was not the case. They did have some good wins, including on the road at Kentucky. They lost a close one in Maui versus Creighton early in the year. So, this wasn't a disaster by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're an Arkansas fan, you have to really ask yourself, was this a year that you lived up to expectations? And the answer is probably no, right? Now, if this had been Muss's first year, then obviously it's a little bit different. And once again, I don't take anything away from Arkansas losing to UConn, but I would bring this up. Does Arkansas beat Kansas if Bill Self is the coach on the other sideline? Norm Roberts, by all accounts for Kansas, wasn't the best interim coach, and Bill Self, of course, is arguably the best coach in the sport. That, without a doubt, helped Arkansas win that game. And, it's a tough evaluation here. I like Arkansas men's basketball. I really do. Lots of history there. Muss is definitely a top 3 coach in the SEC, if you were to ask me, but this just wasn't it. And Arkansas is going to have to make some tough evaluations this next year. Obviously, they lost Brazil to injury earlier in the season, but I'm going to give this and I know I'm going to get flamed for this, a stock down. And it's kind of hard to argue to the contrary, especially considering how many times they lost in Bud Walton this year. Moving on to Chris Jans, this is without a doubt a stock up. Mississippi State basketball almost has no history whatsoever, and Jans made Mississippi State competitive in year one. So, I mean, you can look at the resume all you want. We don't have to spend too much time on this one. I give Mississippi State a lot of credit. This was a step in the right direction, without a doubt. Obviously, you would like to see more out of this program, but we'll see what they could do moving forward. So now we get to Todd Golden. I think this is going to sound like very defensive because Florida is known for winning national championships, but not quite known as a football school. I'm going to give it a stock down. Once again, the record this year, to get it exactly right, was 16-16, and a recent NIT blowout loss to UCF. But when you actually go back and look at their schedule, this ended up being one of the more brutal non-conference schedules I honestly have ever seen in the SEC. You just would not have predicted that before the season. So Kennesaw State, obviously a team that should have won their first-round matchup versus Xavier, who then ended up going to the Elite Eight. Obviously, Florida Atlantic is mixed in there. West Virginia was also a really solid program under Huggins. And then, of course, UConn looks like the absolute best team to ever play. And then you go all the way down to Kansas State, who was also in the Elite Eight. So they played 4 Elite Eight teams this year. Now, they did not win any of those games. In fact, they were not very competitive outside of the Florida Atlantic game. But still, this schedule was brutal. Now, you would have liked to have seen them win more of these tough matchups. But still, the season just did not go as planned. Once again, Florida has had so much talent go through that door, especially over the past couple of decades. But I don't know how on fire I am about Todd Golden. There's just not a whole lot of buzz surrounding Florida athletics at all, really, outside of 2024 football recruiting. But still, the record is a little misleading because we see how good this non-conference was. Yeah, you got a little lucky that Florida State had a down year, but still, this was brutal. So I believe giving Todd Golden some time, but still, not exactly what you'd expect out of the Gators. So we'll get to Alabama in a second, and obviously a lot of people will say Alabama was the most disappointing team in the NCAA tournament because they were predicted to win it all, and then you can have a case for Texas A&M. But there's no team in my mind that is feeling the sting of March Madness more than Bruce Pearl at Auburn, right? So you have the Virginia controversy from a few years ago, and then, of course, last year with Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith, you get crushed by Miami. It doesn't look as bad now in retrospect as the Hurricanes have made another run. And then, of course, this year you had Houston right where you wanted them, and then you choked it. So, yeah, I mean, tough year overall for Auburn. It was a step back on the whole, but, I still like Bruce Pearl as a coach. Man, it's kind of hard to feel one way or the other about this, especially knowing the success Alabama had. And I know it's driving Auburn crazy that you have the basketball program over their basketball program. And still, that Iron Bowl rivalry is still so freaking intense in football. And you're like, okay, we could be the basketball school. But now Alabama is what they are right now. Man, it's hard. I'm interested, Auburn fans. Let me know how you guys feel about Bruce Pearl and this program moving forward. But obviously, they are trending in the right direction. Not as good as they were the year before, but when you lose Jabari Smith and Walker Kessler, that is going to happen. Now we get to a man, obviously this is as clear of a stock up as you're going to find. Jerry Stackhouse has really built Vanderbilt into a respectable program. Sorry for the blurry image here, but they're really good. They were the surprise of the SEC tournament. Of course, it being held in Nashville helps. If you win that road game versus a bad LSU team, is Vanderbilt in the NCAA tournament? I don't know. Now, The one thing I will say is, unlike Todd Golden, there were some non-conference losses out of the gate that really hurt Vanderbilt when it came NCAA tournament time. But when it mattered the most later in the season, Vanderbilt was one of the hottest teams in the SEC. So, obviously stock up. You get the NIT win versus Juwan Howard. That's obviously also very impressive because we know Michigan has a ton of talent every year under Howard. But still, this is a step forward, and I think Vanderbilt should have been in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, here's another complicated one right here. Rick Barnes, 425 win seasons. Tennessee only had 3 prior to Barnes getting there. Also, one of the many SEC programs better known for women's basketball than men's, as Tennessee women's had another solid season this year. This one's tough. Really, really, really tough because of the March Madness exits that just pain everybody, especially considering this year you had, a clear path to the Final Four, and you had this lead versus Florida Atlantic, and you just could not get the job done. Now, of course, you get a really good NCAA tournament win versus Duke. Santiago Vescovi and just this overall team was really solid, throughout the season. Ziegler getting hurt, obviously hurt Tennessee in a major way. But, at some point, you would think Rick Barnes would make it to a Final Four. And it just goes to show you that this man is one of the more accomplished coaches, maybe the most accomplished coach without actually getting to a Final Four at his current school. Rick Barnes is just so freaking talented. But major disappointment. There's no other way around it with how things ended. So I am going to go stock up. I still believe in Rick Barnes. I still believe Tennessee is eventually going to get through things. But, man, this is just a bummer if you're a Vol fan, especially considering how good this football season was. And it was clearly a really good football season just for you to fumble away a game that you should not have lost. Dennis Gates is a stock up, right? What a first year at Missouri. Over 20 wins. Get an NCAA tournament win mixed in there as well. You beat Tennessee twice, both at home and on the road. That is very impressive. I do think their non-conference was a little bit softer compared to other programs. I know they played Kansas in the non-conference, but at the same time, you say that they also beat Iowa State in the non-conference. They also beat Illinois, but let's add in there that Illinois and Iowa State had 2 of the uglier first-round losses in the NCAA tournament, which lends you to think that those programs might have just been overrated. So, yes, you get those 2 good non-conference wins. You also do, once again, beat Tennessee twice, which is really impressive. But, look, I understand this idea that you want to be really excited about the future of a program, right, in year one and establishing a culture and all of that. I think college basketball is a year-to-year thing to where, you're going to get so many new players in and out of, the rosters now with the transfer portal that you really have to look at this season for Missouri and see how big of a loss it was to Princeton this year in the NCAA tournament. Now, this is why I'm going to say this, because it's going to seem like I cherry-picked this stat here, but it's not. Missouri was very lucky. They were 7-0 this year in games decided by 5 points or less. I'll repeat that again. They were 7-0 in games decided by 5 points or less. So that tells you 2 things. The first thing is when they lost. I mean, they were wiped off the floor, right? There was quite a few of these losses where, they weren't ever really in the game whatsoever, and that obviously is something that you don't like to see, right? You want competitive losses. You don't want as many no-shows, especially if you have a 15-seeded Princeton team that if you would have won that game, I honestly think Missouri with all their guard depth that they had this year, I think they would have given Creighton a little bit better run for their money than Princeton did. So I just want to include that maybe under Dennis Gates you won't get a better opportunity to make a run in the NCAA tournament than this one, right? So, look, I get it. This was a very good year one, and you do give him a very fat contract extension, but after the first-round win versus Utah State, he told the media that nobody picked them to win the game, which was just objectively false. There was a lot of people that picked Missouri to beat Utah State, and then in a game where everybody is picking you to beat Princeton, you get blown out. So, look, obviously it was a very good year one. Boom! I'm looking at you. Yes, I hope you like and subscribe this video. Once again, we are all football all the time, but if you like the occasional basketball video mixed in there, let me know, because now we're going to talk about the story this year in the SEC, and that was the Alabama Crimson Tide, okay? I won't get into much of the off the court. A lot of you are familiar with that, and there are a gazillion videos about what has happened with this program, okay? Look, let's be honest. This was one of the best SEC teams we have seen in quite some time. They really were that good, especially getting the number one overall seed. Honestly, the reason why they lost in the NCAA tournament is because Brandon Miller laid an egg. I mean, I haven't showed a whole lot of graphics up to this point, but this is via ESPN. I wanted to show you that Brandon Miller might have had the worst NCAA tournament of any lottery pick we have ever seen, and just any player that played in at least 3 games. And I know it was a first-round blowout, but he put up a goose egg in one of these games. So, Brandon Miller was phenomenal for this team 99% of the time, but when it mattered the most, he was just not good. But look, you look at this season, they only lost on the road versus Texas A&M, on the road at Tennessee, on the road at Oklahoma. They lost to Gonzaga and UConn in the non-conference, okay? The only team that did not make the NCAA tournament that they lost to there is Oklahoma, and it was that random Big 12 tournament, or SEC Big 12 challenge in the middle of the season. That can always be a tricky game for a lot of programs. So their losses were good losses, right? There's just not really many of them. And you run into a gritty, experienced, adult San Diego State team with a lot of fifth-year players. And let's be honest, Alabama was a very young team with Miller, Clowney, and those guys. So that happens sometimes in the NCAA tournament, and maybe this loss to San Diego State isn't as bad as we thought it was. It was kind of a weird game. You lead in the first half, or you were losing in the first half, then you take the lead in the second half, and then you fall apart there at the end. We can get into the late game strategy of fouling and all of that. We can get into the Nick Saban quote as well. It's amazing how many Alabama fans I've seen be mad at Saban for the quote, but let's be honest, this is a stock up, right? You can't just weigh everything on one NCAA tournament game when they were beyond dominant in all their other games outside of a few losses here and there. So Alabama, stock up. Comment down below, where do you agree or disagree with today's SEC basketball video? Would you like me to do more SEC basketball content? Of course, the women's side of things I felt was better, right? I just think with Kim Mulkey at LSU, and then of course what South Carolina's doing this year with Dawn Staley is nothing short of incredible. Ole Miss pulling off one of the biggest upsets we've seen in quite some time. Tennessee having a good season as well. Let me know. Do you think women's basketball is ahead of the men's basketball programs as a whole? Comment down below. It is Power Hour SEC. Boom. And tonight we are doing some lasagna. Let's go.